So I would say Diablo 4 is better than Diablo 3, pretty much in any conceivable way. That said, I have to admit that this
You have triumphed.
feels a lot better than this. Now, before you get your pitchforks and your torches, I'm not advocating for the reintroduction of sets into Diablo 4. Sets had their own problems. But what they did in the player's head, I think, is important. Now, I think loot in Diablo 4 is in a good place. I like the way of getting your good affixes on your rares, getting your aspects off your legendaries, marrying the two. I think that's in a good position. But I think it's important to advocate for what set pieces in Diablo 3 did within the player's head. It granted a smaller pool of items that you would get. Now, often that those set pieces would be bad themselves, but because it was from a smaller pool, you would get a little bit more excited from it just because there was a higher chance that it would be an improvement for you. Now, it's important to address that whenever you have a gameplay loop, there's a few key things, and I think you can break down every gameplay loop into essentially intervals and varieties of dopamine triggers within the player's brain. Now, if you look at the numbers that we see in Diablo 4, those numbers would be one of our dopamine triggers. We love to see those flying up on the screen. The bigger, the better. They sort of help us along. But what happens is with those rares and elites, the upgrades are so few and far between that in our monkey brains, we say, hey, this is all garbage anyway, so we don't get excited for it. And then they have uniques, and it's important to look at what the uniques are and what they do. Now, we have essentially two pools of uniques in the game. We have uniques with interesting aspects, but affixes that are not all in any way appropriate for the classes that they're intended for. And you have then the ultra uniques that are really, really good, but you're never going to see them most likely, so they aren't really relevant to you in your mind. I think that there are probably two things that we could do that I'm going to, propose at the end of the video, because I think it's important to offer solutions when you think there's a problem. But I think it's important that Diablo 4, as it goes on, and the sooner the better, starts to address the fact that looting in a looter needs to feel good, and right now it doesn't. Now, some people will say, well, as seasons go on, they will add more items. That'll increase the variety of what you can find. That will make it more exciting. But the problem is right now the game is at its pinnacle of hype. If you wait, you're going to reach less of those people because they're not going to stick around for those seasons. So how do we make the act of looting feel better in Diablo 4? I think there's a few ways. There's a short term and there's a long term. Short term, I think you need to take a lot of the uniques and rework them. That is to say, the uniques that have those interesting aspects, but not the suboptimal affixes, if you will. You need to go in and change a lot of those affixes. Now, you don't necessarily need to make them like absolute best roles for those classes, but you do need to give them at least a few of those roles to where the aspect, even though it might be marginally better than what they could get, off of a legendary, then there's actually a discussion, because a lot of those aspects, they might be a little bit better, but then you multiply in all these suboptimal affixes and then the item just doesn't become something that you can consider putting into your build. So I think if you do that, you make the uniques feel unique again, which is probably a good thing. The other system I want to propose, and this is obviously something that's more of a long-term solution because I think it would take a lot more work. I think it would be interesting if you allowed the player to go through each slot in their inventory and target which affixes that they wanted from their items. So let's say you're looking at two-handed weapons, you go in, you say, give me vulnerable, give me crit damage, and let's say for argument's sake, you could add third in, and you could say, give me strength. And then whenever an item dropped that had those rolls, it could drop as a different color in the overworld. Like, let's say if you had one of those affixes, it could be blue. If you had two of those affixes, red, three of those affixes, black, just for argument's sake. I think that would go a long way towards not making the player have to find out if they have improvements by looking through their inventory afterwards, but it would also give the player that little bit of a dopamine hit that would, make looting feel better when they see that different color drop for them. Anyways, guys, that's just some thoughts I had on where I think one of the problems that I think is in Diablo 4's endgame and how I think you can make it better. If you found this all interesting, a like would be super appreciated. And until the next time, guys, get awesome.